With the normalization and glorification of steroids and performance-enhancing drugs, I think that the question of which bodybuilding era had the greatest and best longevity has more relevance than ever. We have recently heard of 27 and 28-year-old bodybuilders passing away, and with channels like Greg Doucette's and several others pointing out the dangers of performance-enhancing drug use, answering this question could also help steer young athletes and aspiring bodybuilders in the right direction regarding healthier practices that would reflect a path towards longevity. So without further ado, let's get into this topic. As many of you know, I defined the eras of the Iron Game, specifically from bodybuilding, several years ago as the Bronze Era from 1900 up to the year 1929, the Silver Era from the year 1930 up to 1959, and the Golden Era from 1960 up to 1989, which reflected the practices, traits, and technological advancement associated within each period, with the Bronze Era representing strongmanism's transition into the birth of modern bodybuilding, the Silver Era with the development of more massive bodybuilders, the discovery of testosterone and importance of nutrition, and the Golden Era with the proliferation of steroid use and the birth of the gym culture and supplement industry. The topic of longevity in the Iron Game was always of importance, and all you have to do is look at old school muscle mags such as the respective US and UK magazines called Strength and Health and Health and Strength, whose names reflected the topic of health, and the content within also promoted health and longevity. And as mentioned, longevity is now of greatest importance, with our social media being flooded by influencers promoting irresponsible behavior, taking steroids and promoting other dangerous practices. Therefore, to answer this question, we need to not only assess the practices of each era, but the longevity of the respective athletes. The longevity of athletes in respect to each era was actually partially assessed by my friend and academic Professor John D. Fair in his seminal book, Mr. America, The Tragic History of a Bodybuilding Icon, which focused on the birth of the Mr. America competition and how the Mr. America provided a model of functional manhood to bodybuilding's gradual and increased dependence on drugs, as well as its focus and obsession on size to the detriment of health. Although Fair's book roughly covers and addresses the longevity of athletes between the periods of 1939 and 1992, it doesn't go into the longevity of athletes in the Bronze Era at all. And the reason for this is that the Mr. America competition was only birthed in 1939. So I have decided to also look at the lifespan of Bronze Era athletes, and along with Professor Fair's assessment of Mr. America bodybuilders, we can more accurately answer the question of which bodybuilding era had the greatest and best longevity. We will also try and assess the lifespan of at least 20 athletes per era to assess the overall longevity within each era. As a disclaimer, I have to admit that this method of analysis is only preliminary and only serves to observe a trend of longevity in each era. To accurately assess the longevity of bodybuilders from all eras, a much larger number of athletes that are not limited to the Mr. America competition, but would also cover the other competitions such as the Mr. Universe or the Mr. Olympia, would also need to be assessed, but more on this later. When we think of the Bronze Era, we immediately think of athletes such as Eugene Sandow, who was inarguably the father of modern bodybuilding. However, many other athletes stand out and can also be named, such as Charles Atlas, Bobby Pandeur, Arthur Saxon, Charles Rigoleau, George Hackenschmidt, George F. Jowett, Sigmund Klein, Al Trelor, Lionel Strongford, Alan Mead, Max Eek, Monty Saldo, Fred Rollon, Milo Steinborn, Ernest Cadine, Clevio Massimo, Otto Arco, Hermann Goerner, Professor K.V. Iyer, Of course, none of these were Mr. America champions, but I have chosen these names as they represent the most successful physical culturists of the time, who represent prime elite examples of Bronze Era athletes. If we tabulate the age of death of all these Bronze Era athletes, we can see that most lived relatively long lives. Now, if we use the information regarding the lifespan of Mr. America athletes from Professor Fair's Mr. America book, we can also separate the lifespan of athletes from the Silver Era and Golden Era. Now, this book was published back in 2015, and since then, several more Mr. America bodybuilders have passed, so we can also add to this preliminary data. We end up with the following table of bodybuilders from the Silver Era and a table of the lifespan of bodybuilders from the Golden Era. I decided to apply basic statistical analysis such as creating scatter plots, calculating the average lifespan, statistical deviation, and from this information I could also calculate something called a basic t-test to compare whether a certain area was statistically different to the other and therefore conclude whether it is healthier than the other. Applying basic statistical analysis, we can see the following results. When we look at the scatter plots of the individual lifespans in each era, we can see that in the Bronze Era, 4 bodybuilders died before the age of 60. Now, I chose the age of 60 as a general cutoff for a good lifespan, because in all honesty, most people, I think, would want to live to at least 60. Of the bodybuilders from the Silver Era, only 1 died before the age of 60. And from the Golden Era, 5 bodybuilders died before the age of 60. If we look at the frequency of bodybuilders that live past the age of 90, which many would consider a long life, 1 bodybuilder from the Bronze Era lived past the age of 90, 2 bodybuilders from the Silver Era lived past the age of 90, whilst no bodybuilders from the Golden Era lived past the age of 90. Histogram plots of the means of each era reveal that the Bronze and Silver Era had similar lifespans, with the lifespan of the Silver Era bodybuilders being 4 years greater than those of the Bronze Era. Bodybuilders from the Golden Era had the lowest lifespan, being 11 years lower than bodybuilders from the Bronze Era and 15 years lower than those of the Silver Era. T-tests, which allowed the comparison of each era and determined whether they are statistically different or not, revealed the following. Knowing that a p-value of 0.05 or under is regarded as statistically significant, we can see that there was no statistical significance in the lifespan between Bronze Era athletes and Silver Era athletes. However, there was a statistical difference in the lifespan between Bronze Era athletes and Golden Era athletes. The greatest statistical difference in lifespan was observed between the Silver Era athletes and Golden Era athletes. These results indicate that when compared to the Golden Era, a greater lifespan was achieved by athletes from both the Bronze and Silver Era, with athletes from the Silver Era achieving the greatest lifespan from all the 3 eras. And I mean, is it any surprise? There are of course many factors that we can talk about from each era that could contribute to these results. First, let's not ignore the elephant in the room any longer. It is well established that steroid use and performance-enhancing drugs became increasingly prevalent between the 1960s through to the 1980s, with bodybuilders looking to push the boundaries, which of course was aided by the increasingly demanding judging criteria, with ever larger and more muscular and defined physiques. By the 1990s and up to now, terms like ripped to shreds, grainy, that grainy look and vascularity, these are common terms and describe the look that is expected from bodybuilding athletes nowadays. We have read and heard and seen the potentially dangerous practices that are now common practice in bodybuilding increase over the years, and it is no surprise to see that this preliminary study that I've performed has revealed what most of us already know. When looking back at the Bronze Era, medical technology and nutrition were at their infancy, and the results reflect the lifespan of athletes from a century ago. Although these limitations existed, the results demonstrate that these athletes still had a relatively longer lifespan than those of a more modern era. Performance-enhancing drugs and anabolic steroids did not exist back then. The focus of physical culture, as it was called, was purely on strengthening the body and mind, increasing its vitality and beauty by developing internal organ health. This cultivation of strength, health, and vitality were revealed in the muscular specimens that were the Bronze Era athletes. It is also of little surprise that the Silver Era bodybuilders lived the longest. Understand that nutrition became a priority in the Silver Era, with heavier emphasis on the consumption of high-quality animal proteins and a whole food diet based on grains, fruits, and vegetables. Little to no protein supplements or supplements of any kind existed except for liver tablets, wheat germ oil, and milk and egg protein powder. These simple but complete foods and extracts were less processed and refined than today's supplements, which at best are purified substances from whole food. In the Silver Era, there was also likely little to no dependence of performance-enhancing drugs or steroids. I am not doubting the possibility of experimentation of these substances, and it is reported that early use existed back then. But bodybuilders primarily placed importance on correct training and nutrition. In essence, the Silver Era took off where the Bronze Era started and developed it further towards the goal of attaining a strong, healthy body full of vitality. One can also argue that medicine and surgical knowledge and practice has improved dramatically over the last century and may have a bearing on these results. If anything, I would expect that modern medicine is keeping bodybuilders, especially from the golden era, alive, and without these technologies, their life expectancy could have been even more reduced. Medicine was not as advanced as it is today, and one could also argue that the life expectancy of bodybuilders from the Silver and Bronze era could have been even greater if they had access to modern medical practices. Now, I want to briefly discuss the limitations of this preliminary work. One of the issues I found was to actually have enough data on the lifespan of bodybuilders. One problem is that there were few bodybuilding competitions during the first 3 decades of the 20th century, that is, during the Bronze Era, and I therefore chose to select the most elite athletes from that time as examples that would be representative of the lifespan expected from the Bronze Era. Another limitation is that there are few competitions that span several decades, let alone a whole century. Only 2 competitions could be considered, and these are of course the AAU Mr. America and the NABBA Mr. Universe competitions, as these competitions began during the Silver Era and continue to this day. Many of you may be asking, why not the Mr. Olympia? Well, quite simply because this competition started during the Golden Era and therefore only yields data from this particular era. Finally, I would also like to point out that many bodybuilders from the Golden Era are still alive, and based on when they pass away, which they eventually will, it is a reality, the data could be rather different in the future if we were to take their lifespans into consideration. I finally want to state that this preliminary study is part of a much larger study that I am conducting with Ulster University in the UK, specifically with my friend and collaborator Dr. Connor Heffernan, lecturer in Social Sciences of Sport. We are writing a paper together on the topic of lifespan of bodybuilding athletes throughout the eras, and I will most likely begin a PhD with him to look at this topic in greater detail. This, for me personally, is a great step forward into the academic field of sports science in a topic that has grown to become a real passion for me. Once the paper is finished and published, We will release it as an open access article as we believe that this topic is of great importance and should be discussed openly and reflected on to protect our athletes, not just in bodybuilding, but in all sports. So what's the overall conclusion of this preliminary study? It appears that competitive Silver Era bodybuilders had the greatest lifespan, followed by Bronze Era athletes. Competitive Golden Era athletes seem to have shorter lifespans due to an increased frequency of dying at an earlier death, and this is likely due to the increased risks that the athletes put themselves under to be competitive in the sport of bodybuilding during the Golden Era. Again, this work is preliminary and has only focused on the lifespan of Mr. America athletes, which has its own limitations. Having said that, although these results and conclusions are preliminary, they do serve to outline the dangers in the sport of competitive bodybuilding. Now, before I leave, and being on the subject of longevity, I would like to remind you that I am now offering online coaching for natural bodybuilding, and I have had great results with many middle-aged male clients looking to improve their health and fitness. My approach is holistic and looks at both improving internal and external health. More information is given in the video description below. So on that note, that is the end of this video, and I do hope that you have enjoyed it. If you have, please give the video a thumbs up, share it, and leave me your comments because I think it is a very important topic that we have addressed today. I will continue to update you all on my upcoming paper, and I will also continue to create further videos on the topic of longevity in bodybuilding in the near future. That's it from me. This is the Golden Era Bookworm saying bye for now. Head to www.goldenerabookworm.com for the biggest range of classic old school bodybuilding books as ebooks, e-magazines such as Iron Man and Reg Park Journal, high quality bodybuilding posters of the Golden Era stars, merchandise and classic gymwear featuring Steve Reeves, Marvin Eder, John Grimmick, Reg Park, and many other Golden Era stars. For those wishing to build a classic physique, lose fat and build muscle, online training is also available. Collectibles such as rare autographed photos from the Golden Era stars are also available, and to collaborate, please get in touch. Now, if you're interested in learning more about Vince Gironda's approach to bodybuilding, his principles, and all these tips of wisdom that he has, I mean, there's so much stuff that probably hasn't been proven by science, and it will take science to prove or disprove Vince. But to be honest, these 3 books, I believe, which I call the Classic Physique Bundle, are the best books that Vince ever came out with. And they, of course, are the Wild Physique, the Master Series, and the Pro Series. Have a look at it this way. The Wild Physique, I believe, is like the ABCs of Vince Gironda's principles to bodybuilding. He teaches you the exercises and his principles. But how do you put them together? Well, the Master Series is a 14-month program of using all of these principles, all of the diets that Vince came out with, all of the exercises. And of course, the Pro Series was a book that he came out with later on, specially targeted for getting into competition. It's just these 3 books, as I call it, the Classic Physique Bundle, Vince's best work, and available, of course, at www.goldenerabookworm.com.